So today we're talking about menstruation. So first off, let's watch a quick video so we're all aware of what happens. All right. So I understand that this could be a awkward topic for some of you, depending on your family experience or culturally. So, however, it is part of the syllabus, and in some ways, regardless of who you are, if you're going to continue on in life science, you kind of do need to have some basic understanding and knowledge of how this system works. So, in this case, if you have any questions, make sure you do ask. And we're going to, as I said before, today we're just really talking about what happened in those 28-day cycle. We're going to talk about those four hormones, who makes them, and what they do. Okay, we're going to talk about the interaction between those hormones after the break. Okay, we good? Any questions so far? Okay. So let's get started. Okay, so a couple of things. So I'm gonna hide. So I use this handout because in some ways it summarizes everything, important facts quite well. Uh, FSH, follicle stimulating hormone. LH, luteinizing hormone. I do expect you to recognize the words. Okay, on test and exam, I do expect you to recognize the words. Oh, hi. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Oh, that's fine. It's okay. Yeah, it's actually should be double set. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So you are expected to recognize it. So like on the multiple choice or a written question, I might in the question itself or choices itself, it might be follicle stimulating hormones. In your written answer, you can use FSH or LH. I am not going to ask you a question like, what does FSH stand for? I think at this point, we're kind of beyond that kind of question. Okay. It's almost like, what does DNA stand for? This is like you ask a grade 10, not necessarily grade 12 bio students. Okay. So, in terms of these four hormones, so the first two is made by the pituitary gland. Pituitary gland, as you saw in the video, is a very small pea-sized gland or part of the brain. However, it controls a vast amount of hormones. Okay, uh, so for these two are made by the pituitary gland. The other two, estrogen and progesterone. Now, first off, this corpus luteum thing. What on earth is that? What on earth is that? So, on the other notes, you have a much nicer diagram. You have a much nicer diagram. So, if you look here, the handout that you have from the handout you have on Monday. So, the first stages of the menstruation cycle start off with a few follicles developing, maturing and developing, okay? And right up until an event called ovulation. During ovulation, the most developed follicle, the oocyte will come out, leaving the empty follicle behind. The empty follicle itself is called corpus luteum. Corpus luteum. If I remember correctly, it stands for yellow body in Latin. I don't remember exactly the reason why it's the yellow part, but
What are like the spaces in between that's like
these here. Um, you know what? I'm not sure. I can't quite tell from this handout. I'll have to look at the original a little bit later. Yeah. There seems to be some faint outline, so that's why I have to look at the original. You guys actually have access to the original electronically too. So if you look at the handout folder, you can actually see the original, which is colored. That's why, but we don't have color, or we can't color print that much. Okay. So the corpus luteum, that's what we're talking about here. So estrogen is made by the developing follicle. So before even the event of ovulation, you will have the developing follicle will be producing estrogen, and after the ovulation, the corpus luteum will be secreting the estrogen too. Okay. The So corpus luteum makes two of these, estrogen as well as progesterone, and they both have their job in terms of estrogen is promoting the thickening of the lining, and progesterone is making sure that lining stay there. Okay, so estrogen and progesterone, they both do slightly different tasks. This is promotes it being thicker. The other one is keeping it thick. Okay, the lining that the fertilized egg could implant within. Okay, questions so far? No? Okay. All right, so a few things happening over here. So if you look at this lining, this diagram. Now, day one, day one only goes from 1 to 5. Okay, my apologies on the highlighting. This is not part of it. Okay, so menstruation, day one is uh, day one of that 28 cycle is when the first day of your period. Okay, first day of your period, that's day one. Okay, as you see here, the uterus lining just started uh, breaking down and leaving the body. Okay. Now, in this diagram, menstruation could, like in the video said, could take up to a week. Okay, some women take longer. Sometimes, some women at various time could take longer or shorter period of time. Okay, but for us right now in this note, we're gonna just say day 1 to 5. That's menstruation. Okay. Now, day 14, kind of smack right in the middle of the cycle. This is ovulation. Okay. Ovulation happens on day 14. So between day 6 to day 14, that's the follicle phase. That's the follicle phase. So if you look here, in this diagram, you have down here that shows the uterine lining, the lining of the uterus or the endometrium. Here, that's a diagram of the ovary. So in the first number of days, 6 to 14, you are having follicles maturing in the ovaries. Okay. On day 14, ovulation, technically one egg will leave from the ovary. Okay, one egg will leave the ovary. And you have the empty follicles staying around. Empty follicles staying around. Now, if there is no pregnancy, that corpus luteum will slowly break down. If there is a pregnancy, if there is a pregnancy, that corpus luteum will stay around a little bit longer. Continue pumping out progesterone until the developing fetus would start take over the job and producing hormone itself. Okay. Maintaining that uterine lining is important to maintain that pregnancy. Okay. Yes. Yes. Are we good? Okay, so let's look at a little bit this diagram a little bit. Any questions, by the way? The other class, I'll ask a lot of questions. So let's start talking about day one, starting from day one. Okay? So lack of progesterone, okay, causes the menstruation. Remember, if you look back in the last page, progesterone is responsible for maintaining that lining. So if there's no more progesterone, that lining will shed. Okay, that's actually the term they use. They will shed that lining. Okay. Uh, so by the end of day five, I know where there are a lot of variations. We're just going with what the books say or what the notes say. By the end of day five, you're dealing with the situation of the follicle phase. Okay, so this part here, the brain start. So the brain starts sending out the FSH as well as the LH. So FSH promotes development of the fetus, or the fetus follicle in the ovary, and LH promotes ovulation. Promotes ovulation. Okay. So as kind of the role says, FSH is to promote, stimulate the follicle development. So in this case, FSH will go first. Okay, FSH will go first, stimulate development of the follicle in ovary. Then step two, follicles will mature in the ovary. Now, estrogen around that time stimulate the thickening of the uterus lining. So if you look here, from the follicle phase right up to ovulation, this uterine lining is growing. It is getting thicker and thicker. It's not at its highest, but it is getting thicker and thicker. Now, LH, luteinizing hormone, as the job says, promotes ovulation. Promotes ovulation. So, right just before day 14 or around day 14, there will be a peak of the LH, luteinizing hormone level will peak really high that day or around that day, which triggers ovulation. Which triggers ovulation. Okay. Now, ovulation, right after ovulation, according to the video, that time frame, 24, 48 hours, that's the uh, high, highest chance of fertility. Um, and as you see here, right after ovulation, estrogen level, estrogen level actually was increasing by the developing follicle. So before ovulation, that's been happening. That's because of the estrogen. And progesterone, maintaining that thickening lining. So right after ovulation, you have the corpus luteum. That corpus luteum maintain the lining, and the corpus luteum also contain to make the estrogen. So continue to stimulate the lining. Okay. So estrogen making the lining thicker, progesterone making sure the lining stay there, making sure the lining stay there. So as you can see here, after ovulation, this continue to grow until right around the time when the corpus luteum start breaking down, you're not getting more estrogen. Okay, you're not getting more estrogen, and your progesterone level will start to drop. That's when it goes to the lack of progesterone causes menstruation. Okay. Any questions on this so far? Okay. Now,